Hello and welcome. My name's Caroline and Zamora, and I'm the Chief Deputy County Clerk. I just want to say thank you for listening to today's podcast. This is the Preserving History and Democracy podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following us. We've had today's guest on a few times, so before Bern introduces him, the last time might have been one of our most fun podcasts that we did. Honestly, going into it, I didn't think it was going to be really fun, and then I was surprised. We had a great podcast. That was a lot of fun. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bern, our amazing producer and researcher extraordinaire, to introduce our guest today.
Okay, I'm very excited about today's topic. We'll be discussing the ultimate Renaissance man who hailed from northern Spain. He's been described as proficient in astronomy, cartography, mathematics, geography, geology, and so on. He also was an iconologist, a painter, a sculptor, and a drawer. And for today's topic, we have our own Renaissance man. He'll be introducing us to this incredible topic and that of Bernardo De Miera y Pacheco's map-making skills here in the New World. But before we dive in, let's welcome our special guest, Troy Ainsworth, and his encore presentation on our podcast. And we thank you again for your support.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great introduction. The part about Bernardo is correct. The other part, that's a little sketchy. But thank you. That was very kind. Thank you. And glad to be back. And let's talk a little bit about map making in 18th century New Mexico.
Excellent. I'm really excited. You have a really cool map right next to you. It looks Tolkien-esque.
Tolkien-esque. A great adjective.
Yeah.
Yes. And so if you're going to talk cartography, I suppose you have to have a map to show. So we have Exhibit A for listeners and viewers, and a copy of a portion of an overall map of New Mexico that Miera Y Pacheco, who really was a remarkable individual. I mean, as you pointed out, the areas of science and inquiry that he was interested in, and that he pursued and mastered, and that for him, being from the Iberian Peninsula, being educated, coming to the New World, and really learning in a land, in an empire that exceeded the size of his own home country.
Yeah.
Because when you look at Nueva España versus the motherland, Spain is relatively small in comparison to the New World claims in North America. And so for the early years, and this will precede Miera Y Pacheco by 2 centuries, Spain really didn't know what they had north of the city of Mexico. Okay, so in the valley, in the valley of where Tenochtitlan stood, and after Cortez's conquest, it's in the next 10 years or so that begin to push outward in the various directions and attempt to learn what is this, what is the land, what does it look like, what are the people, we're laying claim to it, we need to know about it. So we have to fast forward and think in terms of the 18th century, when the hero of our discussion today was in both El Paso del Norte, right to the south of us, and La Villa Real de Santa Fe to the north of us. And so, yes, he would have been traveling right through where we are today on El Camino Real, making his journeys from the north to the south. And so we don't have a monument to him. Maybe we ought to. Maybe we ought to, because in many ways his early work and that of his countrymen is one of the reasons why Las Cruces is right here. How about that, huh?
Yeah.
So it's an 18th century. As a scientist, he was really part of a very important movement that's emerging, that we call the Enlightenment. So when you think about his contemporaries in the 18th century, you have to think of people such as Thomas Jefferson. Now, they didn't know one another, but their minds most certainly did, because they were both very intellectual. And that's really an important thing, because, Benjamin Franklin is a little bit older than Jefferson, so Franklin is more in age, would be closer in age to Miera Y Pacheco. And here they are at different points of North America, knocking over one pillar at a time of ignorance and embracing science, map making. And the cartography that, primarily is what we're going to be discussing, is really important in order to understand, for officials in Mexico City in particular, to understand what the frontier looks like, how big it is, how extensive, who are the people who live there, where are the settlements, where are the places that we potentially could settle. And of course, there's always the part about conflict. There are plenty of people who already live here who are not necessarily welcoming to having new neighbors, that sort of issue. So the map making is both an art, but it also has a very pragmatic function. So it's pretty impressive.
This is really impressive. I think of like you said, the Spanish Empire didn't know what they had, and so how
Right.
important his work was to them. It's not like they could go and take a picture of this stuff,
So right, and one of the things also to add is that North America, the interior was not very well known, but all the European powers that were laying claim to North America were claiming everything, every bit of it. So we think of the English and the Dutch and the French and the Spanish, but we also have the Russians who were making little forays into Alaska and as far south as northern California. In their proclamations, like La Toma, that Oñate read at the present site of San Elizario back in April of 1598, the La Toma is laying claim to everything on the other side of the river, all the way to the sea, right? And the sea being the Atlantic. Well, at the same time, the English are saying we lay claim to everything from Virginia all the way to the sea, meaning the Pacific. So they overlap. They both can't be right. This is a case where two things cannot be right at the same time.
Right.
And so, for someone like Miera Y Pacheco, the service that he is providing to his king, to the sovereignty, is living on the frontier, recording and producing maps. That's part of what he was doing to help out his government in many ways.
And I was going to ask you, what tools did they have to do that? Today we have Google Earth vehicles going down the street, making it simple, collecting data. Now, what did they use back in the day?
First-hand observation.
That's it.
Horseback, traveling extensive miles, as we can clearly intuit from this copy. This map is, of course, nowhere to scale, and that's not the important thing. The important thing is to show officialdom. Here down south at San Elizario at the Presidio, and at Paso del Norte, and where the missions are located along the river, and the route of the river, including the great bow that it takes out toward the west, and where the Jornada del Muerto is. So, letting them know, here is your river, here is the highway that will lead you up to Santa Fe. For the purposes of gathering data, is what we would say now. You have the little guy driving the car that says Google on the side and has a little antenna, and they are photographing the street, and that's going to become the Google view. It's going to be a street view.
Right.
Your good eyes on the back of a horse. And,
Amazing.
And a lot of note taking. And after he would write down all of his notes, now he has to translate it, if you will, into a graphic depiction of the land that he has crossed. And so, if he had done nothing more, that's a pretty significant accomplishment.
It is.
You know, because keep in mind, travel is not necessarily extraordinarily safe. A small party traveling a great distance. There's a reason that Spanish settlement was thwarted north of El Paso del Norte.
Yeah.
And before you reach the Socorro, the present day Socorro, New Mexico area, this was all unpopulated, an unpopulated region for Spaniards, not for natives. I mean, there are plenty of people who live within the region. They are simply not receptive to, the presence of Iberians taking or encroaching or just try to peacefully settle.
Right.
That's the conflict, the age-old conflict in North America. And so, so it all happens right here in little old Doña Ana County. See, there's a shameless plug for Doña Ana County.
No, we appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Honestly, I think taking like a wider view, like we never really hear, or at least I didn't growing up, the Spanish Conquest. We didn't learn about it as much. We learned about everything that happened, in the English coming over. I just happened to know that the Russians were doing their thing also, but that wasn't taught to me in school.
No,
Wow.
and I grew up in Northeast Texas, and so for us, the focus would be on New England. That in 1492, Columbus arrives, and then fast forward to 1776, and in between, nothing of importance happened, and yet, in this flyover span of time that we telescope, what was going on in New England was so late to the North American game, if you will. Let's put it into perspective on the famous painting of Washington at Valley Forge. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a very important moment during the Revolution.
Is that the one of him on the boat?
Yes, the crossing the Delaware. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So it's that campaign. If it fails, if Washington does not succeed there, this rebellion may collapse. Okay. So we're not celebrating July 4th or anything like that. At Valley Forge, during that campaign that we're all familiar with, at the very identical moment, literally at the very same day, out to the west of us, are two friars and an attachment of a military escort, the Dominguez Escalante expedition. Their purpose was to leave Santa Fe, to go north toward Abiquiu, make this large arc-shaped travel to find a direct route to California, because the missions out in California were raising sheep here in New Mexico. They're not raising sheep out there, and they need both wool and mutton. And so if we can find a direct route through the mountains and out to the coast, then what we can do is establish a trade connection with California and its missions and New Mexico. Now, that expedition did not succeed in its intended purpose. But what was materially added to the geography and the knowledge of the land is priceless. And so the Dominguez Escalante expedition made this pretty much a large loop. Supplies running low, winter had onset, arrived back at the Rio, in the month of January 1777. So this is just at the crucial moment mm-hmm. where Washington is attempting to continue the war. These two events are happening literally at the same moment, and neither Washington nor Dominguez and Escalante were aware of the other one. and
That's so cool.
And it's happening on the same
I know.
landmass,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're just hundreds of miles apart. Well,
Same continent.
yeah, it's a couple of thousand miles apart, and yet, and this is our United States education model of social studies and history. We teach what happened in New England and in the Atlantic seaboard, and we forget that the English were actually much later in many regards
Right.
than what had happened in New Mexico, and New Mexico's history often glosses over what happened locally, and it looks at Washington, it looks at Franklin, it looks at colonial New England, and it's like, yes, but you've got a real rich history right here in New Mexico. Don't neglect it.
Yeah.
This is why I'm so glad you come, because you really bring it home to Doña Ana and what was happening here. I mean, I remember Ponce de Leon.
Yeah, he's looking
Florida.
for that. He's looking for that fountain of youth.
Fountain of youth,
There's going to be
right?
water that's going to restore youthfulness.
And that was long before.
That's in the 16th century.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and so, that he's traipsing about Florida in the latter part of the 1500s in search of a mythological fountain, and yet, what was happening at the same time? Roanoke Island, and so the mystery will probably never be solved of what happened.
That's where the big stone is, right? And
That's right.
They don't know what happened to the villagers.
The people are gone. They were not found. They left. It is evident that there were English settlers there, but there was no trace of them. Okay, so while England is losing its people, Ponce de Leon and his men are, cutting a path through Florida, looking for this mythological recuperative water that's going to save them all.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so the things that are going on in the background, and I say background because that's how American history tends to be taught. Spanish is background, and English is foreground in many ways. At least in my mind, to have a better understanding of North American history. Let's include the Russian,
Right.
the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, and the English. I mean, these are your primary groups that are trying to carve empire in this extensive landmass. And in all of their cases, there are people who are longtime residents of the continent who are saying, hold on. This is our land. This is where we hunt. This is where our villages are.
Right.
These are the rivers that we fish. What are you doing here? You don't own this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's maybe we
Just out of curiosity, do you know how far the like the Mayan empires or the Aztec empires stretched into North America?
The not far. I mean, all right. So what Indiana Jones is to archaeology, the Aztec Empire is to North American history in many ways. There was a popular conception in the 19th century when the study, what basically is the beginning of ethnography. And so the initial pioneers in North American ethnography are beginning to look at native people. Okay, so think in New Mexico, think about Taos Pueblo. And so the romantic fascination with Taos Pueblo and other multi-storied settlements was that here are the children of the Aztec Empire. These are the descendants. It was very much an adaptation of the story of the children of Israel. Okay, so the tribes have fled after the fall of Jerusalem, And so the very same thing must have happened after the fall of Tenochtitlan. So where did the people go? Oh, well, they dispersed to the four corners of the globe. And now here they are in northern New Mexico. These are the descendants. And so, whether it is the newspaper in Santa Fe or in El Paso or in Tucson, every now and again you'd come across a story in the 1880s or 1890s. And I'm thinking of one that was in the newspaper long about 1895 in El Paso. And in a location that would be approximately somewhere a mile, 2 miles from downtown to the east. So apparently someone had purchased a big acreage of land and was going to develop it for houses. And they start moving some dirt around. And lo and behold, as the newspaper reported, the ruins of an Aztec temple have been discovered. Ooh, that sounds pretty cool.
Right.
All right, so the word Aztec often appears in print. Okay, these are not Aztecs. These are the hunters and gatherers, Humano in particular, who at some point, long about 18th century, 17th century, they become sedentary. They learn
stop traveling. Okay.
Right. So they learned how to build flat-roofed, thick-walled structures that we are later going to be fascinated with and call it Pueblo Revival style architecture. All right. So it is easier, instead of chasing food, if we stop moving around so much and we settle and we learn how to domesticate plants that are edible, and we locate near a body of water, a river, so that we can, harvest fish, and that we go out for game. Voila. All right, so all of these things, and I'll get back to Miera Y Pacheco, because those folks whose descendants generations later were alive in this valley at the time when Miera Y Pacheco was alive, he depicted them artistically in a number of his maps. Now, the example that we have present today, although it is detailed, although it is very informative, by his standard of work, this would be the equivalent of a rough draft for a term paper, okay? Because when he would finish a map in its highest artistic form, it really is a work of art.
Yeah.
And in the margins, what he would include, very much in the tradition of 18th century European cartography, is that in the margins, you always had the little angels and the zephyr of the wind blowing, and the all the Catholic or Christian iconography. And so he would localize it, if you will, and depict people that he encountered, people who the soldiers at the Presidio in San Elizario, the native people, the Manzo, the descendants of Manzo, Humanos, Suma, the folks who became Christianized natives after the revolt in 1680, and settled here in the lower valley. And so he would depict them. Now, of course, in North America, if you were a soldier, whether you were born in Spain or born in central Mexico, and you are assigned to the Presidio at San Elizario, you're far on the frontier, and you're probably relatively a young man. You're probably unmarried, and you're in a kind of a strange place, if you will, because it's the
frontier.
It is the frontier,
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of unsettling, and it's a wide open country and the whole nine yards. Intermarriage was very common, so you'd have Spanish or Spanish Mexican males marrying native women. And so in one of the really neat depictions that Miera Y Pacheco did is a Presidio soldier, and he is with obviously his wife, and their child. So it's really the typical depiction of Christ and mother and child scene. Fits right in that tradition.
So he did this in the margins.
In the margins.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
And so the artwork is absolutely minuscule because he doesn't want it to take away from the map. But at the same time, it is the ornamentation and the embellishment that makes it an 18th century
Right.
map.
Now, is this specific to him? Were there other people doing that, or was just
This was
is
really
his
kind
thing?
of specific to him. So
Okay.
imagine it's very equivalent to, that particular artistic attribute that you can look at a painting and know, yes, I know that's Andy Warhol because,
Right.
okay, no one else does that.
Got it.
Okay, so what he inadvertently did, Miera Y Pacheco was an ethnographer without being given credit,
Oh, right.
by John Kessel or, and that's not a slam on John.
Right.
It's more the fact that we wouldn't have called him an ethnographer per se, but Kessel, the author of the authoritative biography on Miera Y Pacheco, most certainly accounts for his ethnographic work, which is really a cool detail. And the way that happened, Kessel was late in his career, and he decided he was going to go back and, this man's kind of fascinating. I want to learn a little bit more about him. And so the maps, the original copies of Miera Y Pacheco's works are in Sevilla, Spain, at the archives in Sevilla, the colonial North American archives, and in Mexico City. These are the primary places. Now, copies are elsewhere. So John Kessel has access to maps, and that's a great place to begin. And so he is looking at them. He has seen them before, but now he is looking at them with very fresh eyes. And he was working with a couple of graduate students, I understand, and they helped him notice the details that he had previously overlooked. I mean, because there is so much ornate detail and geographic information, it's understandable.
Right.
So it's not a criticism. But all of a sudden, when you start to literally magnify the marginal illustrations, oh, I see what he's doing there. That is the actual face of the Presidio soldier of the woman who is the mother of this child right here. And that's what they look like. And what was amazing is he accounted for skin tone very well. The man's skin tone is lighter. He's Iberian. Her skin tone is darker. She's native. And the baby is somewhere in between. And it works. And all of a sudden, it's like now we may not know his name, we may not know her name, but we're not dealing with,
we have a
with
story.
a faceless person anymore. This is what a soldier may have looked like.
Yeah.
And this is what a native woman who now, perhaps has been baptized into the church, now perhaps also speaks Spanish. And so we have the assimilation of culture. That's pretty interesting.
That is.
I mean, and it's right there. It's depicted graphically in the margin. It's not the highlight. You may miss it once. You might miss it twice. But man, when you see it, wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it really unpacks the whole story.
Yeah.
And
Well, he was quite the
doing that.
artist, huh?
Yes, very much so. And two-dimensional art, three-dimensional art. I mean, he was a Santo, so he was a wood carver. It's very important if you're a priest, and the diocese has sent you to do the Lord's work way far north on the frontier, far away from the big city of Mexico, and you have a humble little chapel, a church. You want ornate. You want a nice altar screen, a nice altar. We need metal work for candlesticks in particular, the candle holders. these are not available. These items are not available on the frontier. So that tradition that began from the wood carvers who would make three-dimensional carvings of saints in order to decorate the interior of churches. Not surprising, Miera Y Pacheco learned how to carve wood.
Yep. He did everything.
And he was a Renaissance man, and I think you have a couple of items to show.
I do. I have
Jacob's gonna.
The insignia of the Franciscan order, which he carved in a wooden door, and we'll take a close up. We can put this in the end as well there, Jacob, right? Okay.
Yeah, we'll post it on our socials too.
Yeah.
And it is not by chance that Miera Y Pacheco would have carved a raised, basically a bas relief on a board of wood of the Franciscan order. Okay, he did not just pluck that out of the ether.
Tell us why.
All right, so this gives us a clue about him, about his religious perspective.
He was a Franciscan, obviously.
And so he may not be a priest,
Uh-huh.
but we know context clues matter, and that's one. All right. So what you're going to depict is, of course, in a very favorable light, and because it has a place in a chapel, very important. This is not off marginal, not off to the side. It has a front and center location. So that's important.
Literally a door panel.
A door panel.
Right.
You will see it when you enter, and perhaps there's also one on the inside of the door as well. So enter and exit. You see the seal of the Franciscan order. Okay.
Okay.
And so this is important to give an idea of where his religious inclinations are.
Okay, and we have a little more.
Give the good people more than they can stand.
So I want to just take note on this side is a sculpture, again in wood, I presume?
Yes. All of these are woodworks.
And then a painting on wood. Both very religious. I'll pass this along to
Do we
you.
know what they are? Let's
Yeah,
see. I'll
the
go ahead and read 'em.
purpose, because of the scarcity of artisans and craftsmen on the frontier, for any priest to become aware of someone with these skills, they are highly in demand. So as you can imagine, just by looking at both the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional pieces, an inordinate amount of time is required to produce them. On top of all of his other interest,
Right.
everything he was interested in is time-consuming. So I guess the corollary is, well, I've seen your schedule. You live on the frontier. You're not too terribly busy with a whole lot of other things, so you can concentrate on art, on cartography, on science. He raised livestock, so for everyone interested in the agricultural history of New Mexico, Miera Y Pacheco figures into that story as well. Very interested in the interactions between his people and the indigenous people, because he was more in that spirit that pacification is preferable to military campaigns. Now, he did serve on a couple of military forays against the Apache, and so there is a bit of a military background that he has. I think of it more along the line of Abraham Lincoln being in the Black Hawk War in 1832, and that was all of his military. That was the sum total of his military experience, and yet Lincoln, 3 decades later, is a better master strategist than many of the Union generals at that time. He's basically the guy who came up with the plan. Here's how we defeat the Confederacy. If you'd run this playbook, here, read this playbook and go do these things. It took a while. until he found Sherman and Grant.
Right.
And that's the rest is history. But Miera Y Pacheco had a little bit of military, and so when we say someone is a Renaissance person, they're interested in so many different things. This man really does fit that description. It does not become trite. It is very appropriate. He was very intelligent, very creative, and he was also very humane. I mean, that's my interpretation of him. Very humane. And there is no question that inhumanity was often practiced. Right. I mean, we have plenty of accounts of the conflict between Spain and the people who long earlier inhabited North America. He was not in that camp. And so in many ways, Bernardo De Miera Y Pacheco is something of an outlier among his countrymen. I mean, both he distinguished.
Really what you're talking about, because we hear so many criticisms of the conquistadors and
yes,
the raping and pillaging that happened.
Right.
But this was not what seems to be his way of doing things.
No, that's a good observation because officially Spain recognized that the subjugation of people as they had practiced, basically using brute force, is not as effective as they wanted it to be. Conflict persists. So what do we need to do to revise our approach? And so Bartolome de las Casas was his name, who was a priest and a philosopher. And he was the one who wrote the treatise on for his country. He wrote a stalwart defense of the native people, and that we should not be violent against them.
Wow.
And so his was what would be called a very radical perspective. This would be, this is a banned book right here. This is the stuff on college campuses in 1968.
I was
this
just
is
thinking, give peace a chance.
Yeah, give peace a chance indeed. And so we can thank John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band for being aware of this book, and so that's good. And so, his was a very radical perspective because he is a member of the church, and the church does not cotton too well to those who are not devout followers of Christ. And so, the whole aspect of assimilation into Catholicism, and the punishment for those who choose not to. He took a very different approach, and I think that perhaps Miera Y Pacheco, don't know this for a fact, but Miera Y Pacheco seems to have, at least philosophically, been aligned with that point of view, that the humane approach is preferable to the violent approach, because the violence is ultimately, when you suppress a people for long enough, they are going to revolt. That's what happened in 1680. That's a big part of why there was a 12, 13-year period of time that we are at we're actually beyond the northern edge of Spain's northern frontier, because it was all the way back down below El Paso del Norte. That was it.
Man, this is a good one, guys. I want to get back into talking more about these maps.
Okay, let's do that.
Yes. So what I'm looking at here at this map, and like I said, it's very Tolkien-esque. We talked about how he was really... Now, he was taking all these notes, and I'm assuming his notes are also in the archives in Mexico City and in Spain.
A lot of his written material is extant. Okay, so that's pretty impressive, because I remember looking over an article that was of great interest, and it was for, I think, the American Library Association. and it was about the Pueblo Revolt. Somehow or another, the Pueblo Revolt and the American Library Association Journal have no business, publishing together. But the article was about the 4 extant copies of paper that survived from Santa Fe in 1680. That is the sum total of paper documents.
4 papers.
4 documents
Wow.
is it. So, yeah, we can write an article because it's not very extensive. Now, copies existed elsewhere. So there is fragmentary history of everything that happened prior to 1680. But most of that material was burned during the revolt, and rightfully so. I mean, everything. I hate to say that as a historian, but if you're gonna burn down the conquering people,
It all goes.
you burn it all.
Mm-hmm.
That's unfortunate because we lose a lot of our stories, our history. Much of what Miera Y Pacheco wrote does exist. I mean, he wasn't swept up. He was born he was born 33 years after the revolt.
Okay.
And he was born in Spain. So, but nonetheless, there's a richness, and that's why people like John Kessel can write a biography about this Renaissance man, about this gentleman. And I know you've already seen the title of the map.
Tell us
Of
more
the-
about
of
the
the reef.
title.
Yes.
So the when looking at at just this portion, the entire body, the entire written portion here is the single title of the map.
No.
It describes everything. This is what Alfred Hitchcock did for Psycho, because when word was public that for the American viewing public, a film is going to be released that is of the like that has never been done before, and it is terrifying. It depicts a horrible murder. One in particular, the shower scene.
Right.
And so Hitchcock decided to get in front of everything, and he filmed basically a promo in advance of the release of the film. And in his high-pitched, nasally tone, he walked the audience, if you will, through the house, broad daylight, sunlight coming in the windows. There in that bathroom, he even pulls back the shower curtain and says something like, "Oh, and it's such a horrible scene. It's terrifying." And everyone was diffused. How can it be scary? You told me what's going to happen. Scared the hell out of everybody.
Yep.
And including the actress, not Vivian Lee.
Vivian.
Yeah, Vivian Lee.
Yes.
Yeah, Vivian Lee, who from that moment forward could never shower again. I mean,
Poor thing.
she had to bathe. She was so psychologically traumatized
From that scene.
by that scene.
Gosh.
And so what Hitchcock did is he walked you through and he told you everything. All right. Miera Y Pacheco is doing the same thing with this lengthy description. This is a plan of the country, a map of the country along the Rio del Norte, the North River. So it mentions from the Presidio at San Elizario all the way up to present-day Socorro, New Mexico. So instead of just saying that, he gives us a nice, very descriptive, detailed dissertation chapter right here. And so one of the things that's kind of interesting is, and this is a southern portion of an overall map. There's a second sheet that shows the northern part of New Mexico. So he did these in two separate sheets. The basic information that's encapsulated here is for the Viceroyalty in Mexico City. This is at a period of time here in 1778 in which officialdom is really looking at the Presidio defense system. Where can a Presidio be located in order to defend the frontier? And And one right over here. For context, and for those who are watching or listening, this little point right here is identified as San Diego, and that is a paraje. That's a campsite on the Camino Real. Everyone who is driven on Interstate 25 heading to Albuquerque from Las Cruces or either direction, when you're at the Border Patrol checkpoint that's north of Radium Springs, right, that paraje is just right there on the west side of Interstate. So if you're heading north, when you pull into the
Border Patrol?
the Border Patrol checkpoint, looking across to the west, looking across Interstate, there is a mesa that is over there. It's a little flat top hill that's really, you can't miss it. It is the only thing in your eye, your view shed. And that is known as either San Diego, San Diego, or Tenuco Mountain. It's magnanimously called Tenuco Mountain. It's a mesa. It's about 1,000 feet above the desert floor, and it's a flat top geological uplift, but it's a landmark. And so it's at that point that, of course, the interstate kind of hugs along the river, but the Camino Real, like a bow, if you will, the string of the bow was across the Jornada del Muerto. And so he's accounting for it, but he mentions, this little area over here that we now call the Tularosa Basin, Llanos sin agua, land without water.
Yep.
And so in 1778, this area was arid as well. So this is a dry land. And so if you're in Mexico City, the question is this an area that would be suitable for settlement? No, it would not. Well, why not? The distance from the river and the fact that it is a land that you're going to have to really work for water. And so it's not preferable. The location along the river itself, there was to be a presidio that was about the midway point of the bow of the river. That was a recommendation. I don't know if it was asked for or not, but when you have a presidio at San Elizario and the next one is at Santa Fe, maybe you have something about midway. Okay, so he was offering military advice as well, and for our little bit, there is a notation here called Rancheria Grande, and it's just it's labeled here on the map. That is the location that is going to become, half a century later, that's going to become Las Cruces.
So cool.
So we have Doña Ana on here. We have Bracito right by the Rancheria Grande. And on the opposite side of the river, he does write the word Mesilla. Mm-hmm. Now, as Bern and I were talking beforehand, that does not denote the settlement of Mesilla, because there is not one.
Yep.
But it is the landform. It is the fact that the Sierra de los Organos, the Organ Mountains over here, are tall. And then to the west, at the river, and then on the opposite side of it is a little bitty uplift, a little mesa, this little eyebrow.
So that's why it's a Mesilla. It's a little one.
Precisely. And so it stands to reason, years later, when people settle here, what are we going to call this place? Well, it already has a name. The land does.
Right.
So we'll just adopt that name, and as they say, the rest is history.
Yes.
But he did depict it here, and I think that is that's a testament to the fact that he is putting place names on a map for those folks who are traveling at that time It is not it's still a royal road because it's prior to independence, but that is the route ultimately that is going to become the national road, then becomes the railroad route, and then it becomes interstate highway.
Yep.
So to get back to what we were talking about
In the
last
previous
time about
podcast,
roads,
Right.
here is an early depiction of ultimately what New Mexico Department of Transportation is going to be working on.
This is why I call you the Renaissance man.
Yeah, well,
You're able to make a Hitchcock reference to a map.
we're happy with the
psycho
Beatles. I was
Hitchcock
or the Plastic Ono Band reference. That was the one that-
Fantastic.
So the gentleman, the Miera Y Pacheco is a really interesting guy, and for show and tell, yay!
You have a book for
yes,
us.
Yes, I brought John Kessel's work, that the biography on Bernardo Miera Y Pacheco, and he, of course, the subtitle, he's an 18th century Renaissance man in the New World. And University of Oklahoma Press published this book back in 2013. It is a fantastic, it's a thin volume, but it packs a big punch.
That is so cool.
And it is a great book, and it's from the book that Bern copied the images. So,
Right.
and I have some additional copies, not with me today, but I'll be sure to
Yes, please do.
to bring some extras to distribute.
Yeah, that would be great.
And so he is. I guess we want to kind of put a bow on what is. Why is this man important?
Yeah, Bern, how have you been able to tie this to your research?
Well, the maps that he did focus on our area, and I thought that I would pull out a map of today's, the Doña Ana Bend Colony grant kind of focuses on a similar area. If you could hold that beside
I will be.
the map and maybe point out some of the matching areas. So that's the Doña Ana
Okay.
Colony Bend map.
How does that appear? Does that appear okay? All right. So, a much more detailed and condensed cartographic depiction. But the important thing here, the line over here on the west side of the land grant aligns with the area where we are. It is the Bracito. It is the Mesa. And so it's depicted over here on the west side. We all know that the Rio, before the dams were built, the Rio did not behave nicely according to human behavior, and tended to leave its banks down again.
It recently happened up north,
It
in
did.
Rio Arriba.
Yes, and so floods are a traditional part of all things for our big river, and always have been. So one of the things that's interesting is that when you look at a map, despite the lack of scale, these two, there's no question, that it's the depiction of the same area. This more contemporary map is just a little bit more detailed. That's all.
But you see the bend and everything there in that little section. It's amazing what he was able to do with just a line of sight.
A line of sight and field notes, and then return to Santa Fe and take all that data and draw it. And then after the ink dried, roll them up and carefully send them back 1,600 miles to
Mexico City?
To Mexico City in order for the officials there to unroll the maps, have a look, and begin to discuss among themselves. That's pretty impressive.
That is.
Truly.
Yeah.
That's one of those things where you're just like, we take for granted, hey, just attach it to the email
Yes, we do.
and send it. And so
I was just thinking, I was like, and then you have to hope that the maps even make it there.
And see, that's the other problem. That is a very real problem, because it is possible that any number of mishaps can occur, and you may never know whether the message arrived.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a
Right.
possibility.
It sure is.
And that was the copy.
Yeah, he didn't make extras. He didn't
No.
make copies of his work.
So if it's lost, it is lost.
Yeah.
And now you're going to have to replicate it. And that's going to take time. So in a big perspective, what is archived in Sevilla, what is archived in Mexico City, of course, the big boys like at University of Texas and University of California, they have extant copies of his works as well. We are very fortunate that they exist, because this is a gentleman who is a great contributor to early New Mexico history, and in many ways he is quite obscure, not very well known. Unfortunately, should be, in my opinion, and but for the efforts of Miera Y Pacheco, De Anza comes to mind because he was here both in New Mexico and in Arizona. What they did is significant, and again, we gloss over big chapters, really big chapters of North American history. I'm refraining from saying United States or American history, because in 1778, yes, there is an effort to become the United States, but it's not assured yet, and Spain is not operating under anything United States. Same landmass, yes, just a different part of the neighborhood. And so, but in my view, what we need to do, what would behoove us, is to really sharpen our focus and look at the contributions and the good work from the Miera Y Pachecos, the Juan de Anzas, the people who were here extending empire for Spain with all the baggage that is there, of course. We shouldn't be shy about the good and the bad of history. But at the same time, it is, I think, a disservice to our collective memory that, we're not paying attention to some of these folks who made significant contributions, and that's an area that we need to address, is my view. So I think I hope this has been an interesting introduction to our good buddy Bernardo, and very much a Renaissance man.
Tocayo,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What is that word?
What's that?
Tocayo.
Tocayo?
Tocayo?
Tocayo, my namesake, my comrade and name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tocayo, yeah. And
Yeah.
and he is he's a really interesting guy.
So
He
if you
sure
don't know
is.
what that word means, Bern just kind of alluded to it. Tocayo usually means like you usually have like kind of the same name, or maybe you have like the same birthday or something like that. And so Bernardine, and he's Bernardo, and so that's why she's
Very
calling
close.
him Tocayo. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a very remarkable individual. He is I think, and the paper that I was mentioning to you about West Texas architecture that I have under review right now, I tied that last paragraph off by saying basically that the built environment in West Texas is worthy of remembering.
Right.
It's worthy of preservation.
Right.
And so, in that same vein, this man is very much worthy of recognition, of study, of appreciation. He was not just a minor player on the New Mexico stage. This guy is a major individual, and regrettably, we have not cast that proper light on him.
Well, that's why we have a podcast.
That's
about
why
it.
we have a
We're going to
podcast.
start changing that road.
Not 1968 today, but who knows
Right.
what tomorrow will bring. Yes. It's
Yeah.
it's been a delight. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing us.
This
all
was
good
so
stuff.
cool, and I hope that you all kind of see how we tied this in. Really, what his work was, and to modern day New Mexico DOT and the work that they do. And like without his work, Mesilla may not have been here. Doña Ana County would still be here, but it wouldn't be the Doña Ana County. Las Cruces may not have been Las Cruces. And so I think without his work, I mean, we could tie a lot of things to what is now modern day New Mexico.
I agree. I think that there's without hyperbole and without, kind of overstretching, the colonial era is so significant because the remnants of what was learned. I would argue that the legacy of many of works by people such as Miera Y Pacheco, whether we're cognizant of it or not, it still influences decision making in New Mexico. I mean, because the primary informant for all decisions that occur at the roundhouse, for example, are predicated upon the land.
Yes.
I mean, the land is the grand determinant. And so one generation after another have attempted to depict it, record it, understand it, document it, and all of its changes, in all of its steadfast qualities. And so, we're kind of just the children of that generation, of Miera Y Pacheco's generation here in New Mexico, whether we know it or not.
Right.
And that's a hell of a testimony, and that's a good legacy to have. Mm-hmm. I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe beside Pope up at Santa Fe, maybe we need a statue of
that would be kind of
Bernardo,
cool. Yeah.
so Bernardo and Pope can look at each other.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a bad idea. Yeah.
Well, listeners, give us some feedback on the idea of a statue.
Yes, we'll take donations. Yeah. We'll start a GoFundMe account.
We'll start a fund
for Bernardo to stand in Santa Fe.
Yeah.
He can be there in their outhouse.
I love that. Well, I think that's all we have for today. I think this has been such a fun podcast. I think we should, of course, have you back because you were such an amazing historian.
Oh, thank you.
If you ever want to do a podcast, or maybe we'll do a season specific on history of New Mexico or something like that.
Let's
think about it.
I think that we could, yes. I'll say yes.
Agree.
Okay, we'll just leave it at that.
Sounds good.
And in that way, we can put all the details onto we'll make the skeleton and put all the details in there.
Sounds good. Love it.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been so much fun.
Thank you. And thank you to all our listeners today. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social medias. Be sure to follow the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. My name is Caroline Zamora. I'm the Chief Deputy County Clerk. I want to thank our producer and researcher extraordinaire, Bernardine Caporale, our guest today, Troy Ainsworth, for joining us. I also want to thank Cynthia for always keeping us on track and getting us all this great information. So thank you, Cynthia, our communications coordinator. And also thank you, Jacob, who's behind camera, and our editor extraordinaire.
Yeah, Jacob.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yes. And so be sure to listen to us everywhere, and we'll see you next time.